While it was trying to break free, he asked it to calm down. The animal hit him in the face with its tail. Having broken free, it began to run away and everyone began to catch it. Brown-haired man sent Hippo and Peepodong after him. Peepodong appeared in front of the beaver. He hit him in the face with his paw. The mouse wiped his bruised cheek. He sent his rival away in response. Then they began to fight. Hippo jumped on them from above. The animal jumped back, avoiding the blow. He ran into the thick of the forest. Suddenly the main character appeared in front of him, asking where he was going. Belle jumped off his shoulder. The snake buried its muzzle in the ground. Then it rose, shaking its head. Belle languidly opened its eyes. At that moment, even he, who appeared in this world for unknown reasons, a 500-year-old dormant legend, the Royal Storm, saw the light for the first time in his life. Beaver looked at her with an ecstatic look. The main character looked at the two animals. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously. A blush appeared on the beast's cheeks. Lloyd squatted down, asking if he was ready to talk to him now. Beaver hung his head. Adjusting his bangs, he said that this time he would give in, because he was a gentleman after all. The guy smiled slyly, thinking that now the capture of the legendary beast was complete. They moved to the palace. Beaver crossed his paws, asking what the man wanted from him. The brown-haired man waved his hand with a grin and said that everything was simple. Once in the morning, once in the evening he would need to shout at the lake. Looking at him with displeasure, the beast exclaimed that he knew nothing about negotiations, because everyone knows that you need to offer something in return before asking. The protagonist put his hand behind his head in confusion and muttered that he didn't have much to offer. A grin appeared on his face when he said that if he helped them, then they would all be happy here. Smiling madly, the protagonist leaned towards Belle and asked if she thought the same. The snake smiled happily. The beaver looked at her with a fascinated look. Lloyd turned white and raised his fist when he agreed. Stretching his lips into a sly smile, he mentally called him a stupid slave and noted that he could already be used. Looking at Belle, the guy thought that she had no feelings for him at all. Continuing to mock, he thought that he would bestow upon him the nickname Forever Lonely Royal Storm, and that the two of them would never be together. The smile on his face changed to a puzzled one when he realized that he had never dated anyone either. The brown-haired man approached the beaver. Taking him in his hand, he pressed his cheek against it, thinking that the two of them would be alone forever. Meanwhile, the beast wondered what was wrong with him. He pressed himself against him in response, trying to understand what this incomprehensible warm feeling was. Thus, Lloyd and the Royal Storm found a kindred spirit in each other. Looking at the beaver with admiration, the protagonist asked if he could call him Baibong. He replied that he could do whatever he wanted. A moment later, a man burst into the office. Lloyd asked the sergeant what was the matter and whether he had left with the orc tribe. The brown-haired man shouted with horror in his eyes that on the way there they met an orc who was walking towards them, and he was in a hurry to get reinforcements because their tribe was Achnopnal Megalania. The guy immediately frowned. At that moment, large lizards were destroying the orc tribe. Akuch with an angry face called on his comrades to attack. He jumped on the monster. He hit him on the head with his totem. The beast looked at him with its green eyes. The man shook himself. The lizard swung its tail. A moment later, it hit the orc. Because of Clar, he flew to the side. His comrades immediately ran up to him. The brunette frowned and ordered them not to retreat because they were strong orcs and would never give up. The main character jumped up and waved his hand, telling him to tell Commander Blank that they needed to gather warriors. The sergeant objected, saying that even if they left right now, they wouldn't make it in time. Holding the beaver in his hand, the brown-haired man exclaimed that he had a plan, and then urged the man on. Rushing forward, he replied that they needed to hurry because this was their chance. Xavier next to him asked what chance they were talking about now. A mad smile appeared on Lloyd's face as he said that they would stop this domino of monsters. Handing the seed to the beaver, he exclaimed that it was time for a counterattack. In the street, the people looked up in shock. Their mouths were wide open. Baibong, who had grown in size, jumped up. The guy, grabbing his fur, told him to go ahead because they must show themselves in all their glory and win Belle's heart. After these words, the beaver screamed with enthusiasm. He landed on the trees. Then he jumped again. Blank and his knights also held tightly to the beast's fur. The beast quickly cut through the air. After a while, the forests gave way to deserted terrain. Baibong pushed off the rock. Meanwhile, the Megalania, opening its mouth, roared. The orcs rushed to attack the lizards. After a short time, the beaver appeared. He jumped right in front of the orcs. Akuch covered his face from the flow of sand. The beaver straightened his back in front of the Megalanias. Brown-haired also rose to his feet and began to say this with his gaze and bury it deep in their hearts, pass it on to his monster friends, and if they move west, there will be no hunting. Wide opening his crazy eyes, she noted that this was because they are the hunters and they are the prey. The Megalanias trembled with fear. Baibong swung his paw. Then he grabbed and hit several lizards. He waved his hand again. A moment later, he threw the monsters into the sky. They, with their mouths open, flew through the air. After they landed in the forest, a loud sound was heard. Beaver began to shrink in size. He turned around, seeing Belle behind him. The snake smiled happily and babbled. Baibong grabbed his reddened cheeks. Blank approached the protagonist and thanked them for calling them here, but he did not think they still needed them. Lloyd laughed and asked why he would invite such a precious force for such a thing. He said that they had another important task. Akuch approached them, holding his shoulder. The guy asked if he was okay. Orit looked down and said that they were no longer his allies. The brown-haired man looked at him with a puzzled look. Akuch spread his arms and exhaled loudly. He and his tribesmen folded their fists, exclaiming that he had saved them twice, so they, the Iron Sand tribe, swear allegiance to the Frontera family. With a smirk, the protagonist crossed his arms and noted that it was too early for them to thank him, and then asked if it was time to begin the next stage of the plan, saving the Orc tribe. The man looked at him with a puzzled look. Warriors were walking through the fields with torches in their hands. It was said that not long ago, the Sultan of Isfahan, a neighboring kingdom to the east of the wasteland, set fire to the reed fields of his kingdom for strategic purposes. A swarm of locusts rose into the air. This was what gave birth to the beginning of the domino of monsters. Trolls were walking through the forest with weapons. It was said that some monsters were intelligent. Many of these monsters gathered in wild tribes. And now they witnessed how the top predators of the Megalania scattered papyrus paper in different directions. The lizards flew over the heads of the trolls. It was said that rumors about this began to spread very quickly among the intelligent monsters. A huge black monster walked along the forest crowns. It was said that it was like the mountains in the west. Its size was so great that it could touch the sky. Its tail was filled with the wrath of the gods and could probably cause a hurricane. It had black round eyes, and its gaze was like a deep abyss. It had 2 large fangs with which it could calmly outlive any living thing in this world, and a red silhouette was visible on the forehead of the monster. The protagonist with red hair grinned angrily. It was noted that these were the eyes of the devil that controlled the monster. Baibong turned around, puzzled. Royal Palace of Isfahan. The Sultan sat on his throne while he was being greeted. A man sat near him, telling him that the tribe, the steel sand that had long threatened their lands, has left his village, and he went deep into the forest of the kingdom of Manjantano. The old man stroked his beard, saying that this was a victory for them, and then asked how the kingdom of Manjantano dealt with them. Bowing his head, the man replied that it was without any disagreement, and they simply crossed the borders calmly. The man replied that he would like to see the hated Manjantano drown in chaos. The Sultan, leaning on his arm, said that if this was all, then he was free. The warrior, looking at the floor in fear, muttered that this was all, but something else had happened. The old man cast an interested look at him. Imagining many monsters, he spoke of the monsters returning and attacking their borders. The Sultan frowned and asked again. The man, looking at the floor tensely, noted that they were doing everything in their power to stop the monsters. However, the monsters were rushing at great speed, frightened by the protagonist. The knight said that they seemed to be completely mad with fear of something, but they would not be broken so easily. The Sultan stood up and waved his hand, ordering them to gather forces and use their firepower to instill more fear into the monsters. The man accepted his order. The old man sank down on the pillows, thinking that the tactics of the monster wave had turned against them. He pursed his lips, with an angry face, wondering if this was part of Manjantano's plan. He thought that it was not so, because the waves of monsters were huge, and their return to them was impossible unless a real beast appeared in the west. The protagonist held out the papers with a smile, asking him to sign here. Opposite him on the sofa sat 2 men, asking what kind of paper was this. Lloyd replied that everything was written there. Smiling sweetly, he noted the full payment of the debt. Looking at the paper with the amount, he said that it was a check that he wrote out for them, taking into account the interest. The man immediately grabbed it, and the guy asked what they would say. Looking at them with a gloomy look, he told them to sign quickly and get out of here. Declaring in the office, Arcus crossed paths with the guests. He and his wife approached their son. Looking at him with puzzled eyes, the brown-haired man asked if it was true that he paid their debt. The protagonist showed him a check for full payment and asked if it was worth hanging in a frame. A moment later, his father hugged him. Starting to cry, he noted in a trembling voice that he worked so hard to pay for his father's mistakes, and then began to apologize for making him suffer so much all this time. Lloyd stood there, puzzled, as he put together the man's words about not knowing if he was worthy of being a father. He lowered his empty gaze. The boy placed his hands on his father's shoulders. Looking sadly, he asked if he loved him. Crying bitterly, Arcus asked him why he asked such questions and noted that of course he loved his son. The tent fell silent. Smiling softly, he asked if he needed any other reasons to be a father in that case. The system noted his new achievement called Debt Bondage Release Number 1, which covered the entire Cremona region, and the accrued CP was 2. The effect of the title is the highest level of creditworthiness, the lowest interest rate, and the most favorable conditions. The bright sun sparkled in the sky. The protagonist walked along the illuminated corridor. Xavier approached him and said that the relocation of the Steel Sand tribe to the eastern mountains was complete. Lloyd praised him. He started to walk past him when the knight said that the white archers were helping with the final preparations, and Akuch was overjoyed that he would have more food to help keep his muscles in better shape. The boy noted that he understood and then told him to go and rest for a while. The blonde Martian looked at him. As he continued walking down the hallway, the brown-haired man mentally noted that the Steel Sand tribe had been transported to the forests of the eastern mountains, and even if the monsters were to return, it would take some time, and if that happened, he would acknowledge Baibong and their estate would be saved. He pursed his lips, thinking that now that he had paid off the entire debt, he had nothing to worry about anymore. He found it strange that he was not having fun after paying off the debt. The protagonist lowered his head, wondering if he was having fun or just messing around. The blue sky was visible outside his window. Lloyd was lying on his bed. He remembered his crying father. The boy looked up with empty eyes. Then he remembered his real father, who, crying, told him that he was ignorant because life does not teach him anything, and he made his son suffer. The man began to ask for forgiveness. The brown-haired man covered his eyes with his hand. Clutching the bedclothes with his hand, he, trembling, told his father that he had succeeded. Starting to cry, he asked for forgiveness for not being able to help. The protagonist clenched his teeth tightly. Then he pressed his face into the pillow. Xavier stood at his door, hearing sobs. Lloyd cried bitterly. The knight closed his eyes. Starting to walk along the corridors, he mentally told him to cry as much as his heart desires, because he has many reasons for that. A couple of days later, the townspeople smiled joyfully, wishing long life to the young master. They raised their hands of faith, asking him to look at them. Lloyd walked with his knight. Looking at the townspeople with displeasure, he noted that they were too noisy and asked them to stop. The guy glanced at the fair-haired man when he asked him to try to enjoy this moment at least a little. He asked him why. Looking at the happy locals, Xavier said that all these people could not smile so widely if it were not for him. The brown-haired man turned away from him and asked, didn't he say earlier that it should eat and live for a very long time? Bayern ran out to him, raising the alarm. He asked him what happened. The man, breathing heavily, said that a very large number of people were moving from the south. The main character, looking at him with puzzled eyes, asked if they were enemies. Bayern replied that he was not quite sure, but from what the soldiers said, they looked like refugees. Many people in rags were walking along the path. There was a blue sky above the city. Lloyd went out to the refugees, and the man asked if he was the owner of these lands. He answered with narrowed eyes that he was his son, and then asked who they were. The man bowed his head and said that they came from the south, and that they were Baron Sortino's people. He said that his name was Nicholas, and he was the head of the village of Ansorti. The guy listened with gloomy eyes to his words that his father was the village elder, and he ordered them to leave. The brown-haired man turned his attention to the old people and the woman with the child. He also saw that a board was tied to Nicholas's leg instead of a shoe. The man said that his father defended their lands together with the Baron and died doing his duty. At that moment, the girl was holding onto the trembling old woman. The main character put out his hands, interrupting the story. He raised an eyebrow in confusion, asking what happened there and whether the reason could be an attack by monsters. Nicholas, looking at him, said that he was 2 meters tall and came in a real crowd. There were several hundred of them, and they flew in like a swarm of bees. Face touched his chin when Xavier said that it was a wave of a domino monster, which meant that the scale of the disaster was greater than they thought. Imagining a map of the area, the guy thought that it could be said that all the regions connected to the wasteland were heavily damaged. Then imagining 4 animals with Xavier with a sword, the guy thought that he had everything. Touching his chin, he still imagined the map, wondering where the refugees would go if there was a sea further north. To the south there was another country, to the west there was an island called Cremo, but it was too far. Brown-haired realized that the last refuge of the refugees was Frontera and Lacona, and it was more likely that they would all move to the center. Looking away with a tense look, he wondered how many people they should expect. The refugees fell to their knees and began to beg for help and to give at least 1 piece of bread to feed their children. Xavier looked at the gentleman and said that most likely more refugees would come to them, and then asked if he had a plan on how to deal with them. The protagonist smiled madly, saying that it was very exciting. The blonde man perked up when he saw it. Lloyd looked at him with a wide smile when he asked him what he was thinking in such a situation. He rustled his fingers, telling the knight to just think about how many people were coming to their lands and how much tax they could take from him. The guy widened his eyes and loudly asked if he was really going to take money from these people now. The protagonist put his hand in his pocket and told Bayern to immediately retrain the construction unit into a young cook to prepare food. The refugees bowed their heads again, thanking him. Lloyd called